Let him tell his story, and we should note that his separation agreement with Glenbard South includes a non-disparagement clause. So, of course, we will respect that and the limitations that that clause imposes on our conversation. Matthew Janecek, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
You guys are more than welcome.
So tell us the story. You were a celebrated history teacher at Glenbard South for 2 decades, and then you weren't.
Well, I was actually technically at North for 18 of those years, and then
okay.
the last few years at South, and much for the same issues. They made me have to leave North and move over to South, hoping things may get better, but ultimately they continued to deteriorate. So, and so I decided that after that many years, I couldn't deal with that type of restraint anymore. Yeah.
Well, describe the restraint at North then South.
Well, there's a few conversations over the years. One that kind of highlights perception versus reality. I think we are often taught, maybe it's corporate America also, but definitely in the education world, that perception is reality. Reality isn't reality. So when we would be having conversations on how to better instruct students in whatever capacity, data is driving today's determination. So whatever the numbers say is what they say. And then it doesn't necessarily always matter what the product is or how we get to the numbers we get to. What's important is passing rates and the appearance of success. So, and that image issue, is really, it's trumping any good diagnosis of what is really at the center of some of the problems in public education.
So do they want you to bend the curve so that people would be passing your class?
Yeah, yes, in a larger sense, many districts have gone through this issue where they eliminated 3 levels of courses. Like we often had honors or AP, regular level, and basic. And many years ago, Glenbard isn't the only. Many districts have gone to 2 tracks, AP or honors, and everybody else. And what that ends up doing is it forces parents that want their kids to be in a higher achieving section, perhaps, then they have to take honors or AP, even if they may not really be equipped for that. And then the trickle-down effect from that ends up being if your pass rate or your grades as a teacher fall below a certain mark, then you're on the radar screen. And the diagnosis of why a student might not be succeeding, maybe not reading assignments or completing tasks or just digital, distractions in class, none of that stuff really matters. And it's very difficult to hold students accountable because today we're allowing students with the revisiting of grading and the retaking of tests, and homework doesn't count. These are all things that are happening in public education right now that the teacher is solely responsible for. The administration is accountable to the numbers. Teachers are accountable for producing the numbers, and it leads to a climate of fear, for people.
So
I just couldn't operate. Yeah.
So that's on the student performance side, and that's certainly an issue, and that doesn't come as much of a surprise to us here.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the subject matter? How did teaching history change, or how was change attempted to be imposed on you over your career, and when did that start?
I would say through my career, it really amped up, obviously, after the 2016 election. Cancel culture ramped up big time. The narrative that is a double standard right now. Generally speaking, I would say that conservative-leaning teachers, right, are quiet, and they feel that they have to be quiet. Bringing up a topic in today's U.S. history or government classes about First Amendment rights and censorship may run the risk of getting a teacher labeled a conspiracy theorist.
Wow.
So and if one person is upset, whether it's a parent or a student, if one person is upset, that's who sometimes gets listened to, and including complaining or filing, complaints anonymously. That is also a norm now. Anonymity can wreak havoc on somebody's life.
Oh, I'm familiar with that.
So is it informal? It's just you're always standing under the sword of Damocles, or were you instructed on certain topics? You shall not teach this topic.
You are actually told, and I'm not the only teacher. Many teachers would be empathetic with this in history, to avoid teaching controversial subjects in class and to avoid connecting history to the present day. Those are some of the norms, I think, that are out there. And I hold up the textbook and I say to students or adults, anybody, everything in this textbook is controversy. Politics, religion, civil rights, wars, everything. It's all controversy. But we're not trusted that much anymore to engage in those discussions for fear of offending somebody with a microaggression. Okay.
Well, how would you teach slavery then?
How do you do it? Well, I used to do it in a way where I would show a clip, that one clip from Spielberg's Amistad. We would talk about that, discuss the international slave trade, and then the abolition movement that coincided with it. But if you sometimes also teach, how did slave owners keep slaves enslaved? I know we always had them read a good article that says you couldn't teach slaves how to read. It was illegal. And that kept people ignorant. So when you open that dialogue, and if you step on anybody's toes in that dialogue, or anybody takes offense to a way you've posed a question, the way you've asked a question, any statement you make, you are really walking on eggshells as a history teacher. And if they have the perception that you may be a conservative at all in your public life, then you are going to be targeted.
What about the 1619 Project curriculum? Did that insinuate itself into your classroom in your in the last couple of years of your teaching career?
I noticed it creeping in a couple of years back, and we were instructed on the major premise of CRT. And some of the folks that are pushing that particular system, and the biggest problem they had with me and other teachers is we got sat down and basically they asked, how can you? Oh, this is what it was. There is no way that one human being can empathize with another human being because you're of a different race. So that was an expected major premise. It was meant to be accepted by the teachers that because we were a certain race, white, there is no way that we could understand what it's like to be another race. Now, on the surface, I understand that's true. But digging deep down, why am I teaching history then if we can't teach people to learn from other people's experiences? So on the surface, it expects you to accept that as a truth. Follow?
Right, and then it's a little difficult to address issues like the founders who were not slave owners, Thomas Paine, Alexander Hamilton. It's a little difficult to explain the civil rights movement in the 60s, which included whites along with blacks, because they shared a common understanding of humanity and human dignity. So the point is to separate, not and focus on identities that are different rather than a common humanity.
Oh, unity right now in the system is talked about, but it is never really practiced right now. It is a culture of division, and I know I'm not the only American or the only American teacher that feels it. It's happening macro all over our country, that the forces in power, whatever layer they're holding of power, are trying to divide the people, and they're being very successful at it, you know.
I understand you were asked by your students at Glenbard South in 2020 to sponsor the political debate club at the school.
Yeah.
I'm surprised there is such a thing.
I was it was one of those gifts from God, I guess, a beautiful thing. Because, yeah, it has been stressful for the last 4 or 5 years without question in my life. And then to have the students. And I would actually survey my students as well and ask, you know, are you guys feeling like I'm pushing anything? And wildly, the answer is no. But then when the students asked me point blank, and it was a freshman, they said, hey, can you run political debate club? Because you're one of the only teachers here that doesn't pick a side. You don't pick a side. And I thought that was the greatest endorsement. But even though that was a reality in my life, it never resonated with anybody that had decision-making power. It was like it never happened.
And in part, my suggestion would be that it's because you're compelled to pick a side.
Yes, in large part by default. Yes, and it has softened a smidge. You know, that first year, 2 years ago, when I mentioned we had been exposed to the major premise of CRT, it has dissipated a little bit because there has been quite a bunch of pushback. Really, we've been activated in a way. Those of us that believe in genuine, true equality, right, have had to push back in application, in that application of equality. If you believe it, you have to actually stand up for it now.
Well, do you miss teaching history?
Well, Amy, I do, but in an interesting twist. The day after I decided to resign, another gift from God gave me one class to teach in a private school. So I still have that. Oh. And the other part that I really want to make Americans aware of, and so they understand that public education needs to be revisited, you know, pretty quick here, is that I've been hired to teach in an international setting. And I have foreign students that are in 3rd and 4th grade that speak fluent English from around the world. And they are paying top dollar for me to come in and teach those kids in the exact same way that I used to teach my high school kids. Socratic method, in-depth discussion, challenging questions, all of those things. And I've landed 8 of those classes, and I'm going to continue to add more. And every time I have one of those classes, the parents of the international students, they ask for more classes. I haven't had one yet where I haven't had a follow-up class. So that has been a saving grace.
And when you were going through your turmoil there at Glenbard South, without disparaging anybody or naming names, what was the interaction or commentary you got from administrators, that you got from parents of your students? What was that like?
Generally speaking, it was a company line that the school saw me as really a threat. I think that when you challenge status quo, that you're just perceived as an outsider or somebody that is bucking the system. And I know that I had developed that reputation with them, I suppose, and they didn't want to really dialogue. There wasn't a dialogue. It was a one-way street. The parents largely that I had were wonderful. And I miss them. And I sent an email to them saying, I really apologize. I hate, leaving the school and leaving your students, because the relationships I've built with students over the years are really lifelong. I just had a kid text me right now. He's like, hey, Mr. J, you're sounding great. So the parents are wonderful. But if you upset one parent, or if somebody takes anything you say out of context, that cancel culture is alive and active. So, but by and large, the experiences I had with all my students of all colors, of all religions, we have a heavy Indian population. We have a heavy Muslim population in the Glenbards. I could find plenty of those kids to come and speak on my behalf as well. They're beautiful. And I do miss that element of it, because I love public education. It's the only great equalizer that we really have. These elites that I get to teach now, whether they're in foreign countries or in the United States, they're getting high-quality Socratic discussion and essay writing and all that good stuff. And I want that and most teachers want that for all the American kids that we teach. It's just that, we're not driving it anymore. The teachers are not trusted, one, and then we're not driving anything anymore. We are actually evaluated pretty rigorously on things that we don't have any control over anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And the union, were you a member of the union, and what did they do, if anything, during this?
I was a member. Yes, sir. I was a member of the union for a lot of years, and as I didn't have overt issues like I had after 2016. I noticed obviously that the teacher union was beginning to more and more, and it's embarrassing now that they totally toe the line of the Democratic Party on whatever policy they're putting in place. So last year I withdrew from the union, but that was also after I did tap the union for some help in this, and they gave me the legal end that I could go to, but they didn't want to push back for me on my behalf at all with any of these other issues. They didn't want to push back. So because I was tacitly supported, I decided that I needed to drop that union, and I joined a union that a fellow teacher had told me about, the American Association of Educators, and that is generally just a more conservative-leaning teacher union on the national level. So I used that, and it helped a little bit. Yes, sir.
Well, Glenbard South's loss is that private school you're teaching at now is gain. Matthew Janecek, former Glenbard South history teacher. Matt, thanks for joining us and sharing your insights. Appreciate it.
Anytime. I appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me.
Oh, thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening to Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan